I started noticing it in a way that was almost impossible to catch, like a small detail lost somewhere in the middle of a busy day. A tiny noise, easy to ignore. A name that slipped away at exactly the wrong moment. A simple task I had to mentally repeat several times before I could finish it. That strange feeling of being physically present, but not completely sharp, like there was a layer of fog between you and the world. At first, I ignored it. After all, everyone forgets things, right? Modern life is hectic, stress is high, the to-do list never ends. It makes sense that the mind stumbles sometimes. I convinced myself of that for a long time. But then those moments started happening more often, more frequent, more obvious, harder to hide. And the worst part wasn't the forgetting itself. It was realizing that other people were noticing. That awkward silence after someone repeats something they just said. And you can tell by the look on their face that they'd already said it before. The embarrassed smile when you try to remember something obvious in the middle of a conversation. The feeling that the words are there, somewhere in your memory, but you simply cannot reach them. And there's something even harder to admit. The quiet insecurity that starts growing inside you. That inner voice that whispers, "Is this getting worse? Is there an explanation for this? Is there a point of no return?" That insecurity is what really wears you down. Not the forgetting itself, but the fear of what it represents. That's when I decided to stop treating this as something normal, because the more I paid attention, the more I realized these signs weren't random. They followed a pattern that millions of people live with every single day, without realizing something far deeper is happening inside their brain. And that's when I came across something that completely changed the way I see all of this. To understand what was happening, I first needed to understand how the brain works under normal conditions. And the answer was more fascinating and more disturbing than I expected. For decades, scientists focused on the brain itself when trying to explain memory loss. They looked at neurons, at proteins, at plaques forming between nerve cells. And while all of that is real and important, it was only part of the picture. Because in March of 2026, a research team at Stanford University published something in Nature, one of the most respected scientific journals in the world, that turned everything upside down. What they found was this: memory loss doesn't start in your brain. It starts somewhere else entirely. Somewhere most people, including most doctors, would never think to look. Let me explain exactly what they discovered, because once you understand this, you'll never look at your memory the same way again. Inside your body, there's a communication highway, a direct line that connects two organs that seem completely unrelated: your gut and your brain. Scientists call it the gut-brain axis. And at the center of this system sits one of the most important nerves in your entire body, the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is like a cable. A living cable that runs from your intestines all the way up to your brain, specifically to a region called the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is where memories are formed, where your brain takes what just happened and turns it into something you can actually remember tomorrow. Here's what Stanford discovered. As we age, the bacteria inside our gut change. Certain harmful strains start to multiply, and those bacteria produce specific molecules called medium-chain fatty acids that trigger an inflammatory response inside the intestinal wall. That inflammation reaches the sensory neurons that feed into the vagus nerve. And when those neurons are inflamed and blocked, the signal they send to the hippocampus becomes weak, distorted, like a phone call with terrible reception. The hippocampus stops receiving the information it needs.
and memory formation starts to break down. The researchers didn't just theorize this, they demonstrated it directly.
When they transferred the gut bacteria of old animals into young, healthy ones, the young ones immediately began showing the same memory problems as the old ones, the same forgetting, the same confusion, the same cognitive decline. And then, most importantly, when they restored that gut-brain communication pathway, memory function came back. That detail matters more than almost anything else in this video. Write it down if you need to.
The decline was reversible. Now here is where it gets personal. Because this isn't just something that happens to laboratory animals. This process is happening in millions of people right now. Silently, progressively, driven in large part by habits that seem completely harmless on the surface. Think about your routine over the last few years. Nights of poor sleep, whether from stress, screens before bed, anxiety, or simply the relentless pace of adult life. Chronic stress that keeps your body in a constant state of alert, producing cortisol that inflames every system, including your gut lining. A diet increasingly filled with processed foods, refined sugars, and industrial oils, all of which are scientifically documented to disrupt the delicate balance of gut bacteria. Antibiotics taken repeatedly over the years, each course wiping out not just harmful bacteria, but the beneficial ones that protect your gut-brain pathway. Sedentary hours that slow the movement of nutrients through the intestinal wall. Each of these factors, in isolation, seems small, but combined over months and years, they create exactly the conditions that Stanford described. The harmful bacteria multiply. The inflammatory molecules accumulate. The vagus nerve signal weakens.
And the hippocampus, your brain's memory center, quietly begins to fail, not all at once, gradually, silently, the same way a river erodes a bank, not in a single flood, but one small wave at a time. And here is what makes this so insidious. By the time the forgetting becomes obvious, by the time you're standing in a room wondering why you walked in, or searching for a word that refuses to surface, the process has already been underway for years. That name that escaped you at dinner, that conversation you couldn't quite follow, those moments you quietly brushed off as just getting older. They weren't random. They were signals. Before I continue, I want to pause for a moment, because I know how it feels to hear information like this and immediately want to know, okay, but what can I actually do about it? That's exactly why I've put something together in the first link in the description below. It's not a general health article. It's a specific, practical resource focused entirely on this gut-brain pathway and what it means for memory after 60. A lot of people in this community have already accessed it, and the response has been overwhelming.
Click the first link in the description right now and take a look. Then come back, because what I'm about to share next is just as important. Now, here is the part that genuinely changed things for me. Because once I understood the mechanism, I started looking for what actually supports this gut-brain pathway. And what I found was, at the same time, surprising and deeply encouraging. Surprising, because most of these things are within reach of anyone. Encouraging, because none of them require radical changes or impossible commitments. The first pillar is gut-specific nutrition. Not a fad diet, not an extreme protocol, but a deliberate shift toward foods that feed the beneficial bacteria in your gut, the ones that protect the vagus nerve pathway. Fermented foods like yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, and kimchi introduce live bacteria directly into the intestinal environment. Prebiotic fiber, found in foods like garlic, onions, leeks, asparagus, and bananas, feeds the beneficial strains already present. And anti-inflammatory foods like olive oil, fatty fish, leafy greens, and berries directly counteract the inflammatory molecules that block the gut-brain signal. This isn't theory. Clinical studies consistently show that dietary changes alter the gut microbiome composition within weeks, and that those changes produce measurable effects on cognitive markers. The second pillar is sleep quality, not just duration. The difference between 8 hours of shallow sleep and 6 hours of deep restorative sleep is enormous for the brain. And here's something most people don't realize.
The gut microbiome has its own circadian rhythm. When sleep is disrupted, that rhythm breaks down, and the beneficial bacteria that maintain your gut-brain pathway lose their stability. Simple habits: reducing blue light exposure in the 2 hours before bed, maintaining consistent sleep and wake times, avoiding heavy meals close to bedtime, can meaningfully improve the depth of sleep cycles where gut-brain restoration is most active.
The third pillar is physical movement. When you exercise, especially moderate aerobic activity, your body releases a protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Think of it as fertilizer for your neurons. It stimulates the growth of new connections, strengthens existing ones, and has been shown to directly support hippocampal volume. But here's the gut connection that most people miss.
Exercise also increases the diversity of gut bacteria. Studies show that people who move regularly have richer, more varied microbiomes, and that diversity directly correlates with stronger gut-brain communication. You don't need to run a marathon. 30 minutes of walking most days is enough to begin shifting that balance. The fourth pillar is chronic stress management. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, in sustained high levels is directly toxic to the hippocampus. It also damages the intestinal lining, triggering what researchers call leaky gut, a condition where the gut barrier breaks down and inflammatory molecules enter the bloodstream far more easily, accelerating the exact process Stanford described. Practices like meditation, conscious breathing, deliberate moments of mental stillness, and time in natural environments have demonstrated measurable capacity to reduce cortisol levels and protect both gut integrity and brain function simultaneously. The fifth pillar is active cognitive engagement. The brain responds to challenge. When you learn something new, solve a complex problem, play an instrument, learn a language, or engage in any activity that demands genuine mental effort, you are literally building new neural connections. This is called neuroplasticity. And understanding neuroplasticity may be the most important shift in perspective you can make. For decades, the dominant belief was that the adult brain was essentially fixed, that neurons developed to a certain point and then only declined, that the brain was like a machine that inevitably wore down over time. That view is completely outdated. We now know that the adult brain is highly plastic, that it forms new synaptic connections in response to learning, that it can reorganize neural routes to compensate for damage in specific areas, that it can literally grow in regions associated with functions being consistently exercised. London taxi drivers who memorize thousands of streets have demonstrably larger hippocampi than average. Musicians who practice regularly show greater cortical thickness in motor and auditory regions. Long-term meditators demonstrate greater gray matter volume in areas linked to attention and emotional regulation. The brain responds to the demands you place on it. And this opens a completely different perspective. It's not about resignation in the face of aging. It's about understanding that the brain is a living, dynamic, responsive organ, and that the choices you make every single day are constantly shaping both its structure and its function. For better or for worse,
But I know that for someone living with this right now, all of this can feel distant. It can feel like beautiful theory that works in studies, but doesn't apply to your reality with work, family, obligations, constant pressure, and very little time for anything. I understand that. Because forgetting something important isn't just inconvenient. Having to ask someone to repeat what they just said isn't just embarrassing. Feeling your mind lock up in the middle of something important touches something much deeper. The way you see yourself. The confidence you have in yourself. And when that starts happening regularly, the internal narrative changes. You start avoiding situations where memory might fail you. You start writing things down that you used to simply remember. You start compensating, concealing, working around a limitation that grows quietly in the background. That is real. And it's exactly why this matters. It's not about cognitive vanity. It's about quality of life. It's about mental independence.
It's about the ability to be genuinely present in conversations, in decisions, in the moments that count. And the path forward exists. It's not magic. It doesn't happen overnight, but it is real. It is structured. It is grounded in evidence. And perhaps most importantly, it is accessible to anyone who decides to start. In the fixed comment on this video and in the first link in the description,
you'll find something I put together specifically for people who are tired of forgetting simple things. For people who have already lived through the uncomfortable moment of forgetting something important at exactly the wrong time. For people who feel their mind fog more often than it should. It's a practical resource. Straightforward. Grounded in exactly what we've been discussing. The gut-brain connection and what it means for your memory after 60. Click that first link right now. Take 30 seconds to look at it. Then come back for the rest. Because in the end, this is not about accepting decline as inevitable. It's about understanding what is actually happening inside the body and acting with awareness before the process advances further than it needs to.
I say this with conviction because I lived through this process. I started adjusting small habits. Nothing radical, nothing impossible. Things like respecting my sleep cycles more carefully, reducing digital stimulation before bed, including foods with anti-inflammatory and gut-supporting properties, moving more, reserving real moments of mental stillness throughout the day. And slowly, something began to shift. The mind felt lighter, clearer, more present. That fog that had seemed permanent began to lift. Not all at once, not dramatically, but consistently, in the same quiet, progressive way it had arrived. Words started coming more easily. Concentration began lasting longer. Memory stopped being a constant source of anxiety and returned to being something I could actually trust. Today I see my mind in a completely different way. Not as something that is failing, but as a living system that responds directly to the choices I make every single day. A system that can be overwhelmed, but that can also be supported, nourished, and strengthened. And when you understand that deeply, not just intellectually, but at a gut level, everything changes. You stop living in fear of what you might forget tomorrow and start building clarity actively. You stop feeling lost inside your own mind and begin to have real agency over the direction your cognitive health is taking. And perhaps, most important of all, you realize there is still time, that the brain is resilient, that it responds, that changes, however small, have real, measurable impact when maintained with consistency. If this content made sense to you, if something here resonated with your own experience, with the signals you've been noticing, with the questions you've been carrying, then the next step is simple.
click the first link in the description. Access what I've put together there and begin to understand in a concrete and practical way how to support your brain the way it deserves. Because mental clarity is not a luxury. It is the foundation of everything. The decisions you make, the conversations you have, the memories you create, the person you are capable of being at work, at home, in your relationships, for yourself. Subscribe to the channel as well, because in the next videos, I'm going to keep going deeper on these topics in a clear, practical way, grounded in what science actually shows about how to protect, stimulate, and recover the full potential of your brain. You are not alone in this process, and the best time to start has always been right now.